So, welcome, and thank you that you took some time to come and spend some time with me. As you know, I'm Sister Judy Carey, and I am a Sister of Mercy, and born and raised in Waterbury, Connecticut, and spent most of my religious life in the Hartford area. And so when Kathleen called, she asked if I would just do something around religious life. And I have to tell you that this experience of even preparing has been a very reflective reality for me. Now I wasn't around when they were formed in the 1800s, but I came into religious life in 1960, and a lot was happening, So what I'd like to do with you tonight is just to do it in 4 parts. One, to just a little brief overview of how they got started, mostly in the European countries. And then use Mercy, our story. That's why I'm usually a PowerPoint person, but I felt this was a story. And so, of course, I have it outlined like a PowerPoint, but it's the idea of how it began and some common features. And when there was, first of all, the early start, then the growth period. A huge growth period from the 40s to the 70s. And what happened in between. And then from where we are now, from the 70s to now, and significant things are happening for religious communities. And some very difficult. And what my perspective is for the future. And so that's kind of how I'd like to do it. And what I will do is, I can touch on other religious congregations, but I think the experience of us as Mercy, Sisters of Mercy, is a good example to illustrate, what these different eras and what we went through, because we certainly, and I will mention some of the other congregations that are what's happening, because I have the privilege of working with some religious congregations as part of my retirement consulting. So I retired, but didn't really. So what I'd like to, so the first part is the early beginning, and make those comments, as I said, and then try to share with you some of our Mercy story. And it is a story. But there's one thing, it doesn't matter the name of the religious community. There is one thing that's common to all of us. Everyone that started was responding to a need in their place, where they were, and there was a call, really a call in those individuals to start doing something. Usually it was for the poor, or it was education, or it was helping the sick. And that's what brought them together in their place. Organizations didn't form, and a name didn't come until over time. And so for us as Sisters of Mercy in those early days, we were formed in Dublin, Ireland, and Kathleen Macaulay was our foundress. And she was a woman who, through her life, had many challenges as a young woman. And then later on, she took care of a couple, the Callahans. And during that time, she, like with her dad, she used to go out and do catechism, or they'd bring food to the poor. It was always something in her about responding to the needs. And when she was still taking care of the Callahans, she would pack up extra food and bring it and do a whole variety of things in that way. And then there were other women who were kind of interested. They wanted to help. And that's, I think, how they all grew. Others saw that what they were doing, and somehow they said, how can I help? How can I help you do what you're doing? And when the Callahans died, they left her a large inheritance. And at that point, she had many women who wanted to work with her. So she bought a house in Bagot Street in Dublin, and they moved in, And they also wanted to bring in working women and provide education and support. They weren't just going to respond. They were out among the poor. They were packing up stuff to bring to the poor. They were doing education to little children, to be sure, and many of them weren't going to school. And it was as more women were attracted to that. She did not want to form a religious community. She just wanted to do the work. And they just wanted to be able to do it. But a bishop came and said, if you want to keep doing this, you have to form a religious community. Now, this is in the 1850s. Okay? So she couldn't stop. She really needed to do that. And she had another sister. They went through a novitiate training. And while she was there, she was writing the rule for the Sisters of Mercy. And she took her vows and came back to the convent dressed in a habit. And it was not her intent, because she wanted everybody to wear the dress of the day wherever they were, you know. But that's how we began, just in that simple way. And as Sisters of Mercy, so you take all the religious congregations, wherever they were. Some of them were evangelizing, you know, some of them were just teachers. You have some congregations that are just nurses. You know, for us as Mercy, when we take our vows, we take a fourth vow, and the vow of service to the poor, the sick, and the uneducated. So across the Mercy world, you will find hospitals that Mercy started, schools that they started, and services for the poor. And always, even after you taught, I remember as a young sister teaching all day, first grade, East Hartford, and then we would go and teach CCD, or we would gather up meals for some of the poor down in the city of East Hartford. So it was always integrated, but for us in Connecticut, we primarily were in teaching, but I'll get to that. So as time went on, bishops in the U.S. started asking congregations from European countries and France, all of them, could we have some sisters to come and serve in our parishes, in our dioceses, and especially the schools, because the schools were being established, parochial schools were being established for immigrants that were coming to America. And so Catherine Macaulay was asked to send, and she sent Frances Ward went to Pittsburgh. That was the first founding of Sisters of Mercy. But Catherine Macaulay was such a professionally wise woman, which was just, it's amazing. And I think the more I read her story about who she was and the courage. Now just imagine, you're leaving your homeland, never to return. And these were young women, 25, 30 years old, and coming to a foreign land. They had no idea what it was going to be like. And if you know, I left Waterbury and went to Madison. You know, I mean, that wasn't compared to what, you know, they gave up to come. And they started in Pittsburgh, and Frances Ward did come to Connecticut, to Providence, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, and several other places. But what Catherine wanted was that each convent would be autonomous. So when they came to Connecticut, this would be the Connecticut Sisters of Mercy. And when she went to wherever, it would. And so each of those had to have a superior, and gradually, more and more women were attracted, and Mercy grew. And when I entered the Sisters of Mercy in 1960, there were 800 Sisters of Mercy just in Connecticut. Just in Connecticut. And so the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, you know, it was a large, our group were 38. I think we were one of the largest groups. Now we have them entering 1, 2. But even late in the 60s, there was a change. and I'll talk about that. So I would say that the growth period from the 40s and the 70s, it was not just with members, but at that time, so in 1932, the Sisters of Mercy started St. Joseph College. We had the Mount, St. Joseph, and we have St. Mary Home. The Sisters of St. Joseph that were here in Connecticut, they were in the hospitals. But Mercies across the world started a lot of hospitals, and all across the U.S. And so we have been in long-term care. So still, St. Mary's we began. St. Mary's was a house for men, and the sisters started there, and they used to ride the milk truck into the cathedral in order to go to the Mass in the morning. Also, the property, so where St. Joseph College is, where St. Mary Home is, and all the way to Steel Road, and then back by the college, and it went further up. The Reverend Mother of the order in Connecticut at that time spent $1 an acre. And of course, this was like farmland, and everybody thought she was crazy, but a wise decision that she took the risk for. So we in Connecticut during that time, as membership grew, all the ministries were staffed by sisters. And then Laurelton was another place that we have in Milford. And then, as time was going on, in order to hire lay folks, we had more lay teachers needing to be hired, because even though there were a good number of sisters, we had to establish civil corporations, and so that we can be a nonprofit. So all these ministries have a civil corporation besides canonical responsibilities that the leadership have to do. And that was probably the period we were at the height. And then Vatican II came in the 62 to 65. So I entered in 60, and I wore the habit. I was it was a monastic way of life. All the congregations were. And then Vatican II said to all of us, because we're considered laity in the church, and to go back to our baptismal call. And that is a call to each one of us, to our role in the church. And for us as religious congregations, Vatican II says, go back to your charism. Why were you founded? Are you being true to what, in all ways, to what your foundress intended? And I envy some of the newer members that are in the novitiate nowadays over the last 10, 15 years, because they really got to study Catherine Macaulay. We never did. I mean, it was just, we knew she founded, but my novitiate wasn't a lot about Catherine. We did that. Every congregation did that. And began to discover what that original call was, because we were many years out, from that original call. And for us as Mercy, it really brought us into our charism of service to the poor, that fourth vow, the sick, justice, all types of things that was a part of Catherine's expectations of us. And it was also the time when we did go back to what she wanted to wear, the dress of the day. And I loved our habit, but I was happy to get rid of it. And I loved it. It was part of what we chose, but the time was changing, and it was different. We did lose several members around that time, early 70s. So we were 38 in 1960, and in 63, when we took first vows, we were about 32. And then at finals, 3 years later, we were 28. And then that's when many changes. There were religious women who did not want to go that way and broke away from that congregation and formed their own separate congregation, and they retained more of the monastic role. But for us as Mercy, this is what we were called to. And so we began that search. So every 6 years now, but it was every 4 years in Connecticut, we would come together to see where do we want to go, what more do we need to do. Meanwhile, every group, the 25 groups of Mercies in the United States were doing the same. Also what was happening, we had many sisters from, like for us, from Connecticut and from West Hartford. Carrie Dodd Dessel, she was from West Hartford. She wanted to go to Guatemala, and she did, and she died there. She gave her all to this rural community serving the poor. It was a call for her. We have sisters in Chile, Panama. We have Peru, Latin America. We have 11 other countries besides ourselves, besides the 25, at that point, we had 11 countries, 25 groups in the U.S. And in the early 70s, many congregations began to think about, especially the ones with the same charism. So we began to talk about, well, why not do some things together? And the leadership formed a federation. And the Federation of the Sisters of Mercy had no legal, it was just a collaborative sharing. Are there some things we could do together? Maybe not. And other communities were doing the same. The Sisters of St. Joseph, they still have a federation. Some of the groups have merged. So a lot of things started to happen then. The 25 groups of us in 1991, that federation that we have became formalized, and we formed the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. So I'm a Sister of Mercy of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of America. And we had national leadership and formed a council that had the president. So when I was president of the Sisters of Mercy in Connecticut from 95 to 2001, I would go 3 times a year, meetings in Washington or wherever. It was nice in the wintertime, though. We'd go to some of the other countries, like warm countries, Jamaica, Belize. That was really nice. But we worked together trying to see what does it mean to be Mercy. We all were very independent. It was our stuff in Connecticut. So we continued that journey. And it was becoming clearer as numbers were diminishing in the sense of newer members. We still have newer members, and many communities do. Many communities have made the decision to not accept any new members, and I'll tell you about that when we get to what's happening now. So religious communities were looking at how they could partner, how they could work together, how could they further the ministries. Many more were getting into services of the poor, for the poor, and then marginalized. We have several schools for people with disabilities, Gengris, right here in West Hartford, where I spent 12 years, happy years in that area. And looking at how we could reach out, and all the communities were doing that. And some were just focused, but again, no matter what we did up until now, it's even now, what is the need? How can we respond? What can we do? And I remember we were at one of our legislative meetings down in Madison, and someone stood up and said, "We say we're committed to serving the poor. Well, we've got to do something about it. And there's a house in Hartford that's going to be developed, and it's going to put people on the street Why don't we buy it and start a ministry for the poor? And that's exactly how it happened. And I was at that meeting. And of course, we didn't have any money to buy that. I mean, we didn't have the money. The communities that had the hospitals, those sisters got full salaries. We didn't start getting full salaries till, 70s, depending on where you ministered, So we got stipends. And when I first started at the college in 1970, we got a stipend, and it wasn't much, let me tell you. And I'll tell you that the sisters, did piano lessons, did everything else. Everything went into our ministries. Everything went in to do that, to support the ministries into the future, to serve, because that's what we were called to. But I got off now. The ministry is serving I don't know what I was saying. I get a new idea, and I lose my track. But at that time, we began the Institute, we began to think about, we have to consolidate. We have to do something. Now, as I said, nobody was ready to give up Connecticut or Maine or New Hampshire. But we began by looking at how could we help one another. And so all the finance, so 25 groups had finance directors, all these personnel. And the first thing we started, we realized that there was a couple of communities that were having trouble paying for their skilled nursing. So we set a fund, and everybody contributed to that fund, and then those communities could borrow that money. And that was a very poignant moment, because we're saying, if we're really institute, and if we're really all mercy, we have to open up our hearts. We have to open up and say, what else can we do? And how do we move to the future? Then, before my term was up in 2001, in 2000 we began to look at regionalizing. And many years went on, and then in 2005, we were the first ones to form a geographic community. So Connecticut merged with Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, and Albany, and Rhode Island. And we were called the Northeast Community of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. And there was a Mid-Atlantic, there was a South Central, NIPRA, and West Midwest. So all 25 groups. It took a while to have that all happen. But again, it was looking at how do we maximize our opportunities to serve. Meanwhile, some congregations were letting ministries go, turning them over to the lay partners, whatever that was. But started in 2005. We took all our colleges and universities, we have about 15 across the United States, and junior college in one of the other countries, and we formed the Conference of Mercy Higher Ed. So all of them came together under a parent corporation. Now, Connecticut sponsored St. Joe's. We had Connecticut, the leadership had some authority over each of these ministries in order to satisfy canon law. But we knew we had to prepare our ministries for the future. Even though we didn't want to admit it, we were being honest in doing it. After that, we brought all our high schools and elementary schools under a parent corporation. It's called MESA, or it's the Educational Services of the Americas. That has a parent corporation. So at any point in time, when we are no longer able to have governance authority over these, they are set, they can move forward. And most of our health care, even St. Mary Home, is a part of a larger system Healthcare was merging long before we did some of these other things. So rather than a community being responsible for 4 hospitals, that community, another community, they all got together and formed a system. And so you've got Trinity, you've got Ascension, you've got a whole variety of systems out there, and now systems are merging. For us in Connecticut, we formed Conference of Mercy Catholic Health East. It was all Mercy hospitals on the East Coast. That eventually merged into Trinity. So, but always doing this for the reason that we want to be sure the ministries go on beyond us. And that's what every religious congregation has been doing up until this point. I gotta watch my time because I want to give you a chance for questions. So right now, so I want to talk about now. So we've got all those ministries are all set. Many congregations have their ministries, they're looking at that. But the reality is, when I entered in 1960, so it's the group, right now, we're in our 80s. So the 80 to 89 group, we're over 1,000. Currently, across the Institute, we're about 1,900. When we were planning the new, I haven't told you about that yet, but the new structure, we were about 2,500. But that group, the retired group, is so large. And in my age group, it was the big group. And after that, it drops. So we now, in just 2 years ago, we came together as one. It took about 5 years to prepare for that. So there's no geographic community. We are all members of the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. And we have one elected leadership and a variety of other structures to guide it. And one thing I want to say at this point is the other blessing that has evolved, and it's part of that baptismal call. For Mercy, it is the growth of the associate program. And Kathy sit there in the back, is the director of the Connecticut group. But these are lay men and women who have formed a covenant with Mercy. And the whole intent is that they share it with us, but that Mercy is part of their everyday, that they integrate Mercy into their lives. And you think of all the colleagues that we have worked with, that have worked in our schools and our hospitals, who have been touched by Mercy. We have another program called Mercy Volunteer Corps. And these are folks who give a year. It's like the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And we had 3 in Connecticut here. And the sister I live with and another lay woman, we were kind of the coordinating group. And those 3 women, they're still best friends. And Mercy fills their heart. And I went to a retreat with a couple of other groups with them, and I was so touched. Well, Mercy is so important in what they do, how they do it, compassion, hospitality, those values, and that's what our associates have committed to. So I'm not worried about Mercy. We don't own Mercy either. The Sisters of Mercy don't own Mercy. That's all of us. But there are many people that are carrying that on. So many, and so there may not be Sisters of Mercy formally. There'll be a while before that happens, I think, but that, I think we had a role, and this time in history is a blimp on the historical screen of religious life, because there were always small groups, and then we became like the workforce of the church, and staffing all the schools, all of that. And now it's going to get smaller. It's getting smaller. So The other thing I want to say is what's happening now. So you've got what's happening in Mercy. I'm working with, there are 50% of the congregations in the United States have less than 50 members. Less than 50 members. And by canon law, for those of us who report directly to Rome, we have to have a canonical leader. You have to have in the old days they called it the superior, but usually it's the president now. You have to have someone that oversees the congregation. And I happen to be working with two groups, but one group, they will not have able leaders when they come to their legislative session in 2025. They're not able, there isn't anybody. The other group I'm working with, they probably have one more leadership group. And this has been such a painful journey for so many groups. And some groups say, they don't want to merge with anybody else. So there are lots of models. There's some collaborations going on. And there is a way that these congregations will have someone appointed to help. I like to say they say until the last sister dies. I like to say until the last sister is having tea with Jesus, you know? Because it's so painful that they had given their lives. And I had one sister say to me, I never thought I'd be facing this. Never, when I entered. But it is the reality. So, and it's trying to focus on what's the legacy they're leaving. And the legacy really is the people that have been a part of their ministries and what they have done. And what is it, you know? And I think it's the reality of we had a role in time in the history of the church, and that role will be different. So there are new models emerging to help these congregations, and there is an organization called the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, and they're doing tremendous work to help these small, aged congregations that just don't have people to do what they need to do. And one of the things many congregations are doing, trying to get their properties in order. Many are selling their properties and getting everything, the administrative responsibilities in order so that someone can take care of the last sister right up to the end. And so that's probably the pain of the moment for so many congregations. And yet there is great joy on the contribution of religious women in the church. And there's no question that we had a call, it's lived, and I do believe that the same call that called those early sisters, they probably didn't even call themselves sisters, just to respond to the needs. You know, some people have said to me, why did you enter? How did you know at 18? I don't know. I didn't even have the Sisters of Mercy in school. I had the Sisters of St. Joseph, and then I went to a high school, to the Congregation of Notre Dame. But I had a babysitter, and her parents were from Ireland, and they didn't drive. And so we would go down every visiting Sunday to visit her in Madison. She was in Madison at the time. And there was something that was drawing me. And then in St. Margaret's Parish in Waterbury, there was in those days called a sodality for women connected to a parish. And Mercy's ran that. And I was a part of that. And I just knew. I didn't know why, but I had to figure it out. Now, my uncles did not bet that I would not last a week. They didn't think I could keep my mouth shut. Well, I didn't. We found other ways to communicate, you know. But, you know, and I say I don't know, but I know why I'm staying now. And a very poignant moment for me in my religious life was I made a retreat at the International Center where Catherine McCauley started the Sisters of Mercy. And I would get my coffee in the morning and sit in the back of that chapel. And I know my whole life, everything, I couldn't be happier. I'm still happy. I love who we are. And I love what mercy has enabled me to become. And the opportunities that I have had. My career my ministries have spanned elementary ed, special ed, administration, leadership, and retired from St. Francis as the Vice President of Mission. And everything I've done has been always empowered by the community, and education was a value. So I know why I stay. I'm not really clear, but I'm really glad God had a good idea for me. And I listened to it. And I've listened to sisters say that I just felt this call. And so I looked them all up, and I liked what Mercy was doing, so I wrote and asked to enter. I mean, those are the kinds of things that happened in those days. And sometimes most of those sisters that entered had them in school, and were someone kind of, you know, have you thought about it? And we do have women coming now. We have several in the formation process. They're older. We would not take 18-year-olds today. That it's not healthy. You want them to have dated. You want, you know, that kind of thing. I did date, so that was not. It was hard. But when I told the fellow that I was dating that I was entering the Sisters of Mercy, his comment to me was, "Jude, I guess I couldn't lose you to a better guy." Yeah. That was his comment. And I've reminded, I still have seen him. He has Alzheimer's right now. That's the kind. So the persons that are coming, we have some attorneys, we have professional women, development, a variety of teachers, usually, you know, mid-20s all the way through. We have someone who entered. She has taken first vows. She's probably close to 60. But she wanted to be a Sister of Mercy, but she met her husband. And he died about 11 years ago, and she's a nurse, and she retired, and she's, you know, it was just kind of there. And she said, I'm going to give it a try. They probably won't take me. And she applied, and she entered. And she took her first vows with all her kids and grandkids. Oh, wow. You know, and when we had several women entering that were widows or with children, and early on they formed called Sister Moms. That was their support group. But the call of the Spirit will continue. There will be vowed men and women in the future. Small groups, I have no idea what it will look like, but I believe it will continue because the Spirit doesn't stop because life has changed. You know, people are going to be called. But look at the opportunities for women in the church today. And that's part of the reason why some chose probably not to come into a religious community, because there are many more ways. There could be more, but we're getting there. In recognition of the contributions of women. And the time, there will be, it may look different. You know, there's a group of kind of folks in formation from all different communities that have formed a group to connect with one another. So anything is possible. But I believe that the call of Vatican II to all of us, and look at the men, and look at yourselves, and what you do and how you serve in your parishes, whatever you do and your concern for others, it's living that gospel that all of us are called to. It's living that baptismal call that all of us have. And so I do believe it will be small. It'll probably go back to what it was, in the 1800s or even around that time, to small little groups. But the call will always come. And I also believe that the laymen and women are the sisters of the future. And I say that when I speak to boards and trying to get them to deepen the call they have. The boards you sit on, you're the future sisters. Don't look to the sisters. You are the ones that have to carry on that this ministry, its mission, its values. And that's why over the past, I'd say 10, 15 years, we have really been working on mission formation programs for our lay board members, our lay colleagues in all of our schools, because if they can't, they have to be a reflection of that. And we all have mission statements and core values, and they're all lovely words. But if they stay on the piece of paper or on the wall, they have no meaning. And the only way mission and values are lived, it's through us. It's the person who's in that ministry. And so I think the contribution of religious women and all the congregations with the associates, and we have companions that have been inspired, and it's a separate group. They took a vow of service, but things, you gotta let it happen and not be afraid to let new things emerge. And so whatever you do, what doesn't matter where you are, you can be merciful, you can be compassionate, and that's what we have given our lives to. And that's the call to each of us. And I think there's a greater recognition, probably more among the laity than it is in other sectors of the church, but you have a tremendous contribution to shape the church that you want it to be. And I do believe that you will carry on the work, that in a different way, but you will carry it on. Women religious, there will always be women religious, and probably men's orders too, but there'll be fewer, and it will be different. That's for sure. So let me stop. I hope I made sense. I hope it was helpful to just see that progression, but I'd be happy or try to answer any question. I can't promise you I will, but I'll do my best, and if I can, I'll get you the information. Any comments or tell me, do any of you have sisters in school? Yeah? Yeah? What'd you think of them? Wonderful.
I had Mercies.
You had Mercies. God love you.
Yeah, Albany.
Albany. Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
Passions.
You had the Passions, right? Yeah.
Here.
Right here, yeah. Well, the gift of religious women was for a period of time. And hopefully who they were is what's to be carried on by you. We just served a short-term role, I suppose. And when you look at it in the history, we were just a little piece. And the thing in even looking through this, the rhythm, there was a big, started small, got big, and now we're trying to be responsible stewards of all the things that we started, that they are positioned to go on without mercy, without sponsorship, or that they can go and continue what was begun. Sure.
I have a question. Earlier in your talk, you mentioned that as a religious group, you were considered laity by the church.
Mm-hmm.
Then later on, with some of these organizations, it sounded like there was a kind of law.
Yeah, but we're still considered laity, even though we're religious women. We're not ordained, so that's That's the demarcation point. But in canon law, there are several articles that enable us to start ministries on behalf of the church and call them Catholic. And that's why the civil corporations had to be formed now when you're hiring lay folks, etc., over the years. But there's also a piece in canon law that requires canonical governance over each of the congregations. Now there are some groups of religious women that were formed by bishops. They're not a large number, and I guess I don't really know how they got started, but that's another option. But we are canonical. We report, all our leadership report to Rome. So we have some of the health systems report directly to Rome because we turned over that authority. So there are some canonical pieces, but in the light of anything we're non-ordained, and our vows are important. You know, we would have to, if someone wants to leave a community and just be dispensed from her vows, that has to go to Rome by the president of the community. Yes?
So,
Kathleen?
I could be wrong, but from what I understand from what you were saying, you have set up under the foundations that you have worked with over the years. The Sisters of Mercy have worked with different organizations and foundations to work under a model of sustainability for the sisters. Am I wrong?
I want to be sure I understand. So the groups that we have worked with, it's those, we want those ministries to be able, that's why they need to be sustainable and to go on beyond us.
Yeah.
For most ministries, we do not contribute to the operation. We do have a granting possibility for especially ministries that are serving the poor and the marginalized. They can write for a grant. We have taken, but we have a fund for retirement, for the retirement fund that has been invested for years in order to care for our members. And that was our salaries, whatever they were. I can remember the superior always saying, well, we have to put money towards retirement. We have to take care of ourselves. So we have a substantial retirement fund, which all the funds came together. So that's one piece. Am I missing what you're saying?
No, I'm talking about sustainability for the idea of bringing in new members and the idea of the Sisters of Mercy and keeping the idea of it across all different foundations.
Yeah, it won't, I think life experience has said each congregation is going to have a historical conclusion. And these little congregations, 50% are under 50 sisters. You can't, so that's the reality, and I think that's the part of the history. And that's painful, but at the same time, it's looking at the legacy they've contributed. But you can't make people come, and some are coming. For us as Mercy, we have, I don't know, maybe 25 in varying forms of formation right now. But it's really a call, and I think the Spirit is calling lay folks more than they're calling
And I
us.
think that's what I'm talking about.
Uh-huh.
I think the idea and the foundations and the whole premise of the Sisters of Mercy.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of it is, it is sustainable for groups.
Well, our associates, you take our volunteer corps, our associates, and they're carrying on, but it's not vowed. So the vowed life, Mercy will never die. The Sisters of Mercy as an organization will in due time. But it may transform into something. It's early for us. We still have 1,900 members, but it's changing because a large percentage are retired. and in infirmaries, and they were the ones that from the 40s and early on that began many of these ministries and continued to enable us to grow. But there will be something, because the Spirit doesn't stop calling, but it will be different. And it's okay. We were different, it became different from what it was in times before us. But it will be okay. But I think it's the legacy of religious women, and some people became administrators of a hospital and they didn't have a clue what to do. But we did it because you were sent. Go, do it. And we did it. And those are women before me, but it's a tremendous contribution to the mission of the church. And that is what we have been. We have established ministries on behalf of the church. And someone told me they heard bishops say that the religious women are the backbone of the church. I'd never heard that before, but I was delighted to hear it. Yeah, I mean, we were the workforce. And it was that, we then moved out into when we went back into our charism, that's when we started social justice ministries. We're working, people are called to the whole sense of the environment, to women and children. Those are our areas of focus for us as Mercy. And those are guiding what we do. And each group is doing the same thing. We're no different than any other, the Sisters of St. Joseph, Sisters of Notre Dame. They're all finding what is the way for them to move forward and how best to do that. Well, I thank you for coming out to be with me, and I really appreciate it. And I just trust that you will continue your baptismal call and in your relationships and all that you do, that the gift of the Spirit will guide you to. So thank you.